When I started, we were auditing physical infrastructure, and then we moved to the cloud, and I had to learn a whole different set of ways to perform audits and assessments. And now we're dealing with AI. I still see a lot of organizations that are kind of confused, especially around the CMMC and the NIST 800 and 171 is, does it apply to me? What's in scope within our organization? We say start lean and then scale from there when you're trying to implement GRC or compliance or anything within the organization. With the United States trying to force agencies to adapt AI, it's making it harder for these frameworks to catch up. My role is really just to stay up on all these changes and then advise my clients on how these changes are going to affect them.
This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to Innovation in Compliance. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to have Lori Crooks with me. Lori, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Lori, you have a very interesting professional background leading to your current role. Could you give us a summary of your professional background?
Sure. I've been in audit and assessments for cybersecurity for about 20 years. I started out with government doing financial auditing and then cybersecurity auditing. And then I went into industry for a little bit. And then about 7 years ago, I started my own business. So kind of have a good mixture of industry, compliance, consulting, and a little bit of everything on cybersecurity.
You're almost one of the OGs of this space. For 20 years, I don't get to talk to too many people who've been in this space and your space, particularly the auditing side, for so long.
Yeah, thanks for making me feel old, but you are right. I've seen a lot of changes through the years. When I started, we were auditing physical infrastructure, and then we moved to the cloud, and I had to learn a whole different set of ways to perform audits and assessments. And now we're dealing with AI. So it's been kind of crazy journey for sure. But I tell people, if you like to learn, cybersecurity compliance is the way to go because things are always changing.
I'd like to explore the federal requirements for auditing, particularly around some of the key frameworks. So could I maybe start by asking, what are those key frameworks? And could you explain a little bit about them and how Carter helps companies comply with them?
Yeah, of course. From a federal standpoint, there are three main standards. So you have your NIST 853. So if you've ever heard of FISMA, that's where FISMA came from. It started out being for federal agencies that had infrastructure and they wanted to work with federal organizations. So NIST 853 is really kind of the first one that came out years ago. And then from there, they came out with FedRAMP, which is based on NIST 853. And that is for cloud providers that want to work with federal agencies. And then the latest one is NIST 800 171, which is a very slimmed down version of NIST 853, but it's for anyone who is working for the DoD or DoD contractors. There's a flow down clause there to help them protect the data. So what we do is we help organizations that are trying to comply with any of these regulations or standards and go in and do an initial kind of gap assessment, see where they stand against those controls, and then help them kind of remediate those and help them write any of the documentation that's required to meet any of them. And then we kind of are usually the liaison throughout the audit process if they have to bring in an independent auditor to verify those controls.
So what are some of the trends you see from your customers or maybe even in the industry about how organizations are approaching these requirements?
Yeah, I see a lot of people now that are trying to shift from let's just pass the audit, let's just check the box to actually building security that scales because they've seen if they don't have security in place, they could lose those federal contracts. And it definitely does give them a competitive advantage of having those. But then on the flip side, I still see a lot of organizations that are kind of confused, especially around the CMMC and the NIST 800 and 171 is, does it apply to me? What's in scope within our organization? They're just still trying to figure it out. So you see it on both sides, depending on the organization, and that's why we're here to help.
So are there any key insights you've seen that you could tell us about from some of the gap assessments or system security planning processes you've seen across the industry?
Yeah, so we see a lot of gaps around either siloed departments or siloed documentation where organizational departments just aren't talking to each other. And so one person's doing one thing over here with their documentation, another person's doing something over here with their documentation, and there's no kind of communication in between, or they have outdated documentation period, which, nobody's using, which unfortunately defeats the purpose of having documentation and policies and procedures. And then we also kind of see a lack of understanding of the controls and what actually needs to be in place especially around some of those technical controls. FedRAMP, there's a control that requires FIPS 140-2 encryption throughout the organization, and there's just confusion on how do we apply this? Is it just inside? Is it outside, etc.? So a lot of confusion sometimes.
Lori, one of the reasons I was so intrigued to visit with you was because what I saw, what I thought was almost a traditional audit role when you started. And I'm going to call that part of the detect prong, because in compliance, we say prevent, detect, and remediate. But moving forward in your career and what you do now is, I'm going to say, even more preventative and proactive, if that's a fair characterization of the sort of the arc of not only your career, but what you're doing now. How are you seeing, I guess, are companies understanding that they can actually be proactive for compliance, even in the federal sector, or are they still thinking about, it's just document what I've done, so when somebody comes knocking, I can show it?
It's a little bit of both. I think you still have some organizations that are just trying to check the box, but we do have some organizations that really are taking the compliance standard and trying to put it throughout the organization and having that top-down approach. And we see those organizations flourish because we go year after year and do kind of the gap assessment and maturity assessment on kind of the NIST cybersecurity framework for those organizations. But we get to see them, like I said, they're doing great because they are taking the maturity of their compliance seriously, and they are trying to improve year after year. So I love working with those organizations that actually want to take part and expand their compliance and security requirements versus just check the box.
Are there maybe a couple examples, if you could give us, around transitioning regulatory requirements into actionable business practices?
Yeah, like I was kind of talking about for the controls, especially around the NIST cybersecurity framework, there are a lot of controls there that help strengthen the protection around the processing, storage, and transmission of data, which to me, you want to protect your data as a business process. So being able to make sure that it's encrypted as you're storing it, as you're transmitting it, and kind of making sure you know where it is definitely a actionable business practice that you should be doing as well. Also, we see organizations finally take that standard and say, okay, how can we apply this best into our business? And how can we take this and go from a top down approach versus a bottom up approach? And by doing that, they're really helping their organization set apart, give them that competitive advantage. And again, protect the data that they are gathering from their customer.
So, what are some of the scalable GRC programs that you have seen or talked about with your clients put in place? Because many of the listeners to this podcast are GRC professionals, so they're very interested in that component of what you do.
Sure. For scalable, we really see, like I said, around the NIST cybersecurity framework. I know I keep putting it out there, but it's such a great framework for those organizations that aren't in the federal space. If you are working in the federal space, then obviously you want to use one of the ones we talked about, but it is one that can be used against kind of a maturity model. And we've seen organizations take that and apply that throughout. But when we see people try to build that scalable GRC program, they do see a lot of people that try to start out too complex. So they might purchase a GRC program and say, okay, let's audit the world. And then they don't know how to actually use that GRC program, or they've just put too much information in and it's not giving them information that's actually valuable for them to make business decisions at the end. So we say start lean and then scale from there when you're trying to implement GRC or compliance or anything within the organization.
What are some of the top challenges you've seen faced by DoD contractors and companies pursuing FedRAMP?
I'd say the first one really is trying to find an agency sponsor. FedRAMP has been going through a lot of changes lately. There used to be something called a Joint Authorization Board, or JAB, where if you didn't have an agency sponsor, you could go through the JAB and get approved for FedRAMP. But now they've taken that away and forcing agencies to find a federal agency to sponsor any of these cloud service providers that actually want to go through FedRAMP. So I would say that one is definitely the challenge, the biggest challenge I've seen, but also it's very expensive because FedRAMP, and if you're doing on the DoD, the whole process is really resource heavy. You have to have a full stack dedicated towards this environment. You have to have a ton of documentation in place, and you have to have vulnerability scanning. You have to hire a 3PAO. So it's really resource intensive from a financial standpoint, but also from a people standpoint as well, trying to make sure that you have the right people and the right tools in place. And again, it's just expensive.
I'd like to transition over to some AI topics because that's also front of mind for many of the listeners to this podcast. And I was wondering if you might give us your views on how AI is shifting the compliance landscape, especially in the federal frameworks. Or is it just here it comes because the Trump administration has gone whole hog with this?
Yeah, I was gonna say that Trump has signed a executive order in place and he wants the US to be first in AI, which is great, but also provides a lot of challenges, especially around compliance and governance. It adds a new risk and it adds additional controls that need to be put in place because a lot of these standards were built for more like static systems, not for adaptive or self-learning models. So a lot of the standards like NIST and ISO are really having to kind of modify the current standards that they have to start including AI in there. In addition, it's just with the United States trying to force agencies to adapt AI, it's it's making it harder for these frameworks to catch up because we all know usually government works really slow. This is a governmental program. So trying to change a NIST framework to include AI and the speed that people want it to be included is really tough. And they're trying to catch up. And it just, like I said, it's catching up. It's a lot of additional risks of knowing where your information is, how it's being protected. And there's just no oversight yet of any of that.
So, where I'd like to focus on the governance of AI and ask you when you have those conversations with customers or prospective clients, are you having those conversations with senior leadership, either CEO, the board, or are you still working with internal audit or a CTO? All of the above, maybe.
All of the above, to be honest. Most of it, I would say, is kind of that CISO, CTO kind of line of management, which has been great. But fortunately, we've just seen no one wants to take ownership of it. Again, it's just people want to use it, but they don't know who's actually going to be owning the AI program. Is it going to be the CISO? Is it going to be the CTO? Is it going to be somebody else to try to manage that? So it's kind of trying to make sure that one person is going to own the program and own the oversight and then have everything float up under there. But yeah, I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding of AI and governance right now. And it's a problem I think we need to kind of figure out over the next 6 months to a year very quickly.
One of the most interesting comments I heard from a guest was one of the biggest problems is that data security is typically seen as the purview of the CTO or the CISO, and data privacy is typically seen as the purview of either legal or compliance, and that often those groups aren't talking to each other. It sounds like you have experienced that. How do you sit down with someone like me? I'm a lawyer by professional background, and I've been a chief compliance officer. How do you sit down and really help someone like me understand these requirements? Because you're going to have to talk to me differently than you would a CISO.
Yeah, exactly. It's a challenge, and that's why we try to, at least at Cadre, try to speak as we call it plain English. We try to take these complicated, I know it sounds silly, but like people don't understand some of the jargon basically that these frameworks are coming up with. So we try to take that and make it easy for everybody to understand versus whether you're a CISO or whether you're a legal chief counsel. We want everyone within the organization to kind of understand the controls and the frameworks that are out there so they know what controls need to be put in place within their organization, especially when you're dealing with contracts and compliance. There's just going to be so much with AI out there that everybody, legal, CISO, are going to have to know and have to learn themselves.
I'd like to turn to a few questions about your current company. And could you tell us when you founded it, how you founded it, and how it's grown under your tutelage?
Yeah, so I founded it about 7, 8 years ago. I started out as really just a subcontractor for another organization, the DoD contractor. So I was helping them implement the NIST 800-171 because it had just come out, helping them with the documentation and stuff. And then after I worked with them for a year and a half, went on to another DoD organization as well, did the same thing. And as I was doing that, I was like, maybe I can actually expand this and make it a business because I feel like with my background of being inside organizations, large organizations, and being external as a consultant, I could be able and helpful to organizations trying to understand these terms. So that's when I started officially the business and start moving from the subcontractor into actually business owner. And then I was able to start partnering with great teams who referred me work or I worked for them. And then from there was able to bring on my first couple of resources to help with some of the technical documentation. And then we started expanding into FedRAMP documentation outside of the NIST 171 and just again, trying to grow. It's been a journey as a business owner. I've been learning a lot and will continue to learn a lot, I'm sure.
So, what's the role of your technical writing and cross-functional teams in a traditional audit preparation?
Yeah, for that, the technical writing, we take a lot of the policies, procedures, and make sure that they actually match the controls that are in place. So we take that, and that's why we're writing the policies and procedures. We blend some advisory services from there as well, where we could tell them, hey, this doesn't actually meet the standard. Let's update this to meet the standard and help them kind of update some of their business processes as well. So they're actually kind of complying with the standard versus actually not and getting that advice before the actual audit comes. So yes, we find that technical writing is where a lot of people actually struggle. Like they know how to implement the controls or they know what the controls are doing, but they're not able to take that information and translate it into these detailed system security plans that FedRAMP and CMMC require. So we're trying to help take that information, put it in the documents, but also advise as we go, just so everyone has a one-stop shop here.
Are you able, as an external consultant, to help to bring a, if not culture of collaboration, at least some collaboration between internal departments on the projects you work on?
Yes, definitely. It makes our job easier, and we feel like it actually makes the organization's job easier when everybody's kind of on the same page. And that way, there's no playing of telephone, if your readers know how that game used to play a long time ago. And things don't get translated wrongly throughout the mix. So we definitely try to include that internal collaboration throughout the organization because it's just easier for everybody at the end of the day.
Maybe I now like to ask you to turn and look to the left and ask you, where do you see your role and your function down the road? And I would say 2030, but things are evolving so quickly. I'm just going to say down the road. Where do you see your role as an auditor in this moving in the age of AI with the federal sector?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's always changing. So my role is really just to stay up on all these changes and then advise my clients on how these changes are going to affect them, whether it's in the federal industry or non-federal agency in the public sector as well, because things are changing there. So we really stay up on things. We're learning the AI NIST framework. We have a client now going through the ISO AI assessment through a different organization, but we're still kind of plugged in so we can kind of see how that's going as well. But yeah, just staying plugged in, helping our clients with all these changes, and then hopefully taking the new AI frameworks that are out there and helping our clients implement them throughout their organization so they can comply with these as well.
Lori, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we end, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you, find out more about Cadre or any of the topics you've touched on, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
Sure. You can feel free to email me at lori.crooks@cadre.com, or you can go to our website at cadre.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. We post a lot of great content out there. I would love for you guys to go out there and follow us and engage.
Lori, I want to thank you again, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate your time. This was great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the award-winning Innovation in Compliance.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. only on the Compliance Podcast Network, available wherever you listen to podcasts.